The rain hit like static, loud, disorienting, relentless. Ethan didn't look back, he just ran. That was the part his brain refused to process. Where was it? Then he heard it. Not a roar, not a growl. Something worse, breathing. Deep, rhythmic, patient. Somewhere to his left, just beyond the wall of darkness between the tree line and the floodlights. Heavy footsteps pressed into the wet earth, slow, deliberate. Like whatever was out there wasn't in a hurry, because it didn't need to be. Ethan hit the fence at full speed, fingers clawing at the chain link, hauling himself over the top before he even made the conscious decision to climb. Metal tore across his palm. He didn't feel it. He dropped hard onto the other side, stumbled, caught himself, and sprinted for his car parked 30 meters down the gravel road. Key in the door. Engine on, reverse. His hands were shaking so badly he almost stalled it twice. But before he floored it, something made him look up. The old man was standing in the middle of the property entrance. Still, completely still. Rain pouring down over that weathered face, that long coat, those hollow eyes. He wasn't chasing. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't calling for help or raising an alarm. He was smiling, slow, calm, like a man watching something he'd seen play out 100 times before. Ethan drove. He didn't stop until he was 40 minutes away, parked under a gas station awning, hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. That night, barely thinking straight, he uploaded the footage. By morning, it had 4 million views. The comments were split. Half the internet was convinced it was staged, too cinematic, too perfectly timed, classic rage bait. The other half couldn't explain the sound. The breathing caught on the audio. The way the shadows near the tree line seemed to shift. Police visited the property 2 days later. Their statement was 5 sentences long. No animals found on premises. No evidence of criminal activity. The individual residing there, one Arthur Wren, 74, was cooperative and well within his legal rights. Case closed. Ethan almost let it go. Almost convinced himself it was adrenaline, bad lighting, and overactive imagination running wild at 2 a.m. on private property he had no right to be on. Then he watched the footage again, frame by frame this time, at the 3-minute 47-second mark. One single frame blink just beyond the open cage door at the very edge of the floodlight's reach. A shape. Upright. Watching. Solomon was never inside that cage. Ethan didn't sleep properly for a week. He told himself it was just obsession, the kind of fixation that comes naturally when something goes viral, when millions of people are demanding answers you don't have. But that wasn't the truth, and somewhere deep down he knew it. The truth was simpler and far more unsettling. He was afraid, and he needed to understand why. He started with public records, then newspaper archives, then old circus databases that hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. And slowly, across dozens of dusty digital rabbit holes, the name Arthur Wren began to take shape. In his prime, Wren had been legitimate, more than legitimate, celebrated. Newspaper clippings from the late 80s described him as one of the most gifted exotic animal trainers in the country. A man with an almost supernatural ability to handle big cats. There were photographs of him in sequined rings, one arm raised theatrically, while a full-grown lion sat obedient at his feet. The audience a blur of open mouths behind them. But the story curdled quickly. By the mid-90s, the circus had moved underground. Allegations surfaced. Animal abuse, conditioning methods that went beyond accepted practice, which Ethan quickly learned was a sanitized way of saying something far darker. Then came the rumors of underground fights, big cats pitted against each other in private venues for paying audiences. Nothing ever proven. Several investigations opened, several quietly dropped, and then there were the workers. 3 of them, across a span of 7 years, all employed at Wren's traveling show, all reported missing. No bodies ever recovered. The cases sat open and cold in county records like stones at the bottom of a still lake. The property shut down in 2003, no announcement, no sale. Wren simply stopped, retreated to that land, and as far as anyone official was concerned, ceased to exist. Ethan drove out to the nearest town, a dying strip of gas stations, a diner, and a bar with a hand-painted sign, and started asking questions. Most people shut down the moment Wren's name left his mouth. Eyes dropped. Conversations ended. One woman behind a diner counter told him flatly she didn't know anyone by that name, and then disappeared into the back and didn't return. But the bartender was old. Old enough, maybe, not to care anymore about whatever unspoken agreement the town had made with its own fear. He let Ethan finish half his beer before he spoke.
That lion ain't normal anymore.
He said it the way you'd say something you'd been holding in your chest for a long time. Not dramatic, just tired. His name was Solomon, the bartender said. Had been with Wren for over 30 years, which was impossible by any standard lifespan for a lion in captivity. And yet there he was, still there. The bartender had seen him once years ago through the fence on a dare. Said Solomon had looked at him with eyes that didn't seem like an animal's eyes. Didn't seem vacant the way animals look at you. He watches you like he understands every word you're saying, every thought you're thinking, like he's been doing it longer than you've been alive. Ethan asked about the police searches. The bartender's jaw tightened. Every search, he said, every single one. They always ended the same way. Officers would get to the woods behind the property and stop. Equipment failures, disorientation. One deputy had a breakdown on the scene, couldn't explain what he'd seen, put in for retirement the following Monday. 2 others had flatly refused to ever set foot on that land again and faced disciplinary action rather than go back. Nobody pushed too hard. Nobody ever really wanted the answer. Ethan drove home with the windows down despite the cold, needing the air, needing the noise of the road to drown out the sound already forming in the back of his mind. That slow, patient breathing in the dark. He was sitting at his desk that evening when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. No area code he recognized. A single message, 7 words. If Solomon smelled you, it's already too late. Mason called it a field trip. That was the energy he brought to the car, coffee in hand, windshield wipers still dripping from the overnight rain, acting like they were heading somewhere mildly interesting, rather than back to a property where Ethan had heard something enormous breathing in the dark 3 weeks ago. Mason was the kind of person whose confidence came from never having been genuinely frightened in his life. He considered that a personality trait. Ethan was beginning to think it was just a gap in his experience. Tyler sat in the back seat and said almost nothing the entire drive. He'd watched the original footage once, just once, and he'd come anyway, which Ethan figured said more about loyalty than courage. Tyler kept his eyes on the window and his knee bouncing the whole ride out, and when they pulled up to the gravel lot and the property came into view, he was the last one out of the car. Daylight changed the place. That was the cruelest thing about it. In the morning sun, it looked manageable, overgrown and decaying and sad, the kind of abandoned property you'd see in a dozen YouTube videos a week and feel nothing about. Mason swept his arms open like he'd proved a point before they'd even climbed the fence. The barn door was how Ethan had left it, open. The smell reached them before their eyes adjusted to the interior. It lived underneath the old hay and the rot, something copper and thick and biological, the kind of smell that registers in the oldest part of the brain before the conscious mind gets involved. Mason's commentary dropped off mid-sentence. He didn't start it up again. They swept their phone lights across the walls. The claw marks stopped, all 3 of them cold. They ran along the concrete at shoulder height, not scratched, not scraped, but gouged. Long, deliberate channels driven deep into the material with a force that bent the imagination when you stood close enough to fit your fingers inside them. The pattern wasn't random. That was the part Ethan kept coming back to. There was repetition in it, like something returning to the same spots over and over across a very long span of time. The wheelbarrow sat near the far stall. Neither Mason nor Ethan said what the dark staining along its basin obviously was. Tyler looked at it once and looked away and didn't look back. Then Ethan found the symbols. Scratched into the concrete beneath each cage, barely visible under the accumulated filth, repeating sequences of shapes that didn't belong to any alphabet he could place. He crouched and photographed them, feeling something he couldn't name. Not quite recognition, not quite revulsion. Something in between. Like hearing a word in a language you've never learned, and understanding it anyway. It was Mason who noticed the cage dimensions. He said it quietly, without his usual framing, which made it worse. The cages were the wrong size for large animals, too narrow for a lion to turn comfortably. The right width, though, the exact right width, for a human being standing with their arms at their sides. The latches were all on the outside. Guys, Tyler's voice came from the back wall, flat in a way that made the other two move immediately. He stood over a scattered pile of hay, staring down. The seam was barely visible, a rectangular door fitted flush into the floor, a rusted iron ring half buried in straw. All three of them crouched around it in silence and heard it. Not words, not quite. The architecture of words, whispering, pressing up through the wood like air through a sealed container, rhythmic and continuous and coming from directly below their feet. We are leaving. Tyler stood up. His voice had gone somewhere very controlled and very far away. Right now. We are leaving right now. The roar arrived before any of them could take a step. It didn't build. It detonated. A wall of sound that punched through the barn and rattled the tin roof and pushed the air physically against Ethan's chest. Dust rained from the beams. Tyler stumbled sideways. Mason's coffee hit the floor. They turned to the door. Solomon filled it, not crouched, not coiled. Standing the way you stand in a doorway when you own the building. Massive and gold and completely still in the frame of pale morning light. His tail moved once, a single slow arc, and stopped. He didn't snarl, didn't show teeth, didn't make another sound. He looked at Tyler, then Mason, then Ethan, deliberately, one to the next like he was working through a list, and then he simply waited. Patient and ancient and absolutely certain, like something in that barn had the authority to issue a command, and he was giving it the courtesy of time. He only eats the guilty ones. The voice came from the shadows to the left, unhurried, conversational. The tone of a man making a mild observation about something he'd watched happen many times before. Arthur Wren stepped into the light, hands clasped behind his back, that slow smile sitting on his face like something load-bearing. His eyes moved to Ethan and stayed there. Tyler didn't answer his phone that night. By morning, his mother had called Mason twice and Ethan once, her voice carrying that specific frequency of worry that hasn't yet decided how serious to become. By Sunday afternoon, the detective who called Ethan back, used measured, practiced language. No signs of distress, no evidence of foul play. These situations resolved themselves most of the time. He used the word runaway like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. He said it while Ethan was sitting at his desk staring at the barn footage. Because Ethan had already watched it. All of it. Twice, in the dark, with the volume pushed as high as his laptop would go. The visual track gave him nothing he didn't already have. But audio was a different architecture entirely, and Ethan had learned that from the first video. He ran the barn recording through an isolation filter, stripped the ambient noise layer by layer. Rain on the tin roof, their own footsteps, the structural groan of old wood, until what was underneath resolved into something coherent. Screaming, underground. Faint and worn smooth at the edges, the way sound gets when it has been traveling through earth and wood for a long time. Rhythmic, exhausted. The sound of something that had stopped believing in rescue and kept going anyway. Ethan sat very still for a long time after he heard it. Then he watched the last 4 seconds of the footage again. Before the feed cut out completely, Solomon turned his head. Not toward the door, not toward any of them. He turned and looked with absolute precision directly into the camera lens. Eyes filling the frame, pale and still, and carrying that quality Ethan had no accurate word for. The quality the bartender had tried to describe and failed, and held it for 4 full seconds. Like he had always known exactly where the camera was. Like he had always known exactly who was holding it. The feed went black. Ethan stopped leaving his bedroom window cracked that same night. The growling started on day 2. Distant enough the first time that he built a reasonable explanation around it. Truck engine, neighbor's generator, acoustics doing strange things in residential quiet. It came back the second night closer. The third night it was outside his wall, on the other side of the plaster, deep and continuous and vast in a way that the chest registers before the ears do. He lay completely still and listened to it for 23 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock the whole time. The prints were there in the morning. 4 of them pressed into the garden bed beneath his window, each one wide enough that both his hands laid flat inside a single impression didn't reach the edges. He photographed them. He stood over them in the early light, trying to construct an alternative, and found the materials weren't there. The live stream happened 4 days later. 42,000 people in the chat. Ethan talking, keeping his voice level, performing normalcy with the concentration it now required. The chat broke first, a sudden cascade of identical responses. Go back, what was that? Did anyone else hear that? Before Ethan had consciously registered the sound himself, he pulled the recording, scrubbed back to the timestamp the chat had flagged. Beneath his own voice, intimate and textured and positioned like something directly beside the microphone, a whisper. He played it 6 times. He never resolved the words. He decided eventually that this was better. The anonymous message arrived the next morning, all capitals, pressed hard into the notification like the sender had needed it to land with weight. He knows you're sent now. Ethan read it 4 times, locked every door and window in the house, and then sat in the middle of his kitchen floor with the lights on and waited for morning. The package came a week after Tyler vanished. Brown paper, hand-tied twine. His name in the center in handwriting that had pressed deep enough into the surface to score the layer beneath. The writing of someone who needed the impression to last. No return address, no postmark Ethan could trace. He opened it at the kitchen table in full daylight with every light in the house switched on, and for a moment he simply looked at what was inside without moving. The silver compass pendant, thin chain, the one Tyler's grandfather had given him, the one that hadn't left Tyler's neck in the 3 years Ethan had known him. The chain was snapped clean. The pendant was dark with blood that had long since dried. He went back alone. Ethan knew, rationally, that this was the wrong decision. He'd known it the entire drive out, known it climbing the fence in the dark, known it crossing the property with nothing but a flashlight and the kind of desperate momentum that fills the space where better judgment used to be. But Tyler's necklace was sitting in an evidence bag on his kitchen counter, and the police had closed the missing persons case to a holding pattern, and there was screaming in the audio that nobody else seemed interested in explaining. So he went back alone. The barn at night was a different organism entirely. The daylight version had been decaying and sad and ultimately manageable. This version breathed.
It was occupied.
Shadows pooled in the corners with a density that felt intentional, and the smell, that copper and rot smell, was heavier in the dark, like it expanded when the sun went down. Ethan swept his flashlight across the floor, found the hay pile in the far corner and started moving it by hand. The cellar door was exactly where it had been. He hooked his fingers through the iron ring and pulled. The smell that came up from below was indescribable in any way that served a person well. He breathed through his mouth, pointed the flashlight down a set of wooden stairs that disappeared into packed earth, and descended. The tunnels extended further than the barn's footprint. That was the first thing his brain refused to properly accept, that whatever was down here had been built deliberately over a span of time that implied a project, a vision, a sustained and patient commitment to something Ethan couldn't name yet. Rough-cut wooden supports braced the earthen walls at intervals. A single wire ran the length of the ceiling, bare bulbs hanging from it every 15 feet, none of them lit. His flashlight moved in a narrow cone through the dark. He found the first cage 12 feet in. It was occupied. The figure inside was folded against the far wall, knees drawn up, arms wrapped tight around themselves in the posture of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. The scratches on the cage wall behind them were arranged in careful vertical columns, days counted in groups of 5, the way prisoners do, the way people do when they need proof that time is still passing. Ethan counted 4 columns before he stopped counting. He found 3 more cages before the tunnel branched, 2 empty, 1 not. The tools hanging on the wall between them were the kind you'd find in any butcher's shop, except that butcher shops have different clientele. They were cleaned but not sanitized, the particular cleanliness of regular maintenance rather than remorse. There was an audio recorder on a wooden shelf near the branching point, old cassette-based, the kind from the early 90s. He pressed play with his sleeve over his thumb and listened to 40 seconds of a woman begging before he pressed stop and stood in the dark for a long time with his hands at his sides. The writings covered the final stretch of wall in a handwriting he recognized from the package label. Layers of it, overlapping, some sections written over others, a document that had been added to across what looked like years of accumulated devotion. The word Solomon appeared on every visible line. Phrases surfaced as his flashlight moved. The flesh of the fearful consecrated. He requires the living, not the dead. The ritual completes itself again and again. He is not the animal anymore, he is the vessel. The prisoner who was still conscious was in the last cage on the left. A man, mid-40s Ethan estimated, though the conditions made certainty impossible. He flinched from the flashlight with the reflex of someone who hadn't seen direct light in weeks. Ethan crouched at the cage door and kept his voice low and level and told the man he was going to get him out. And the man grabbed the bars with both hands and began speaking immediately, with the urgent cadence of someone who had been rehearsing this conversation in the dark for a very long time. Arthur had found the ritual overseas. That was where he started, not with the cage, not with the tunnels, but with a trip Wren had taken in the late 80s to observe animal handling practices he couldn't access domestically. Something had happened there. The man didn't have all of it, only what he'd pieced together from Arthur's monologues. The old man talked during feedings, the way certain kinds of lonely people talk when they finally have a captive audience. There had been a ceremony, an animal sacrifice that had inverted itself somehow, turned into something else. A man killed in the presence of the lion and Solomon consuming him in the context of whatever ritual framework surrounded it. Arthur believed, genuinely believed, the man emphasized, with the exhausted clarity of someone who had long passed the point of questioning whether the beliefs were sincere, that something had entered Solomon during that moment. Something old, something that had been waiting for the right vessel. Because after that night, Solomon had changed. He'd grown calmer, more deliberate. The random volatility of a large predator smoothed out into something structured and patient and watchful in a way that made the animal category feel increasingly approximate. He stopped responding to training commands and started anticipating them. He began recognizing individuals on sight across distances and in varying light conditions that should have been beyond his capacity. He watched, he assessed, he remembered. And then, in the last 14 months, he had started trying to speak, not mimicking sounds, not the meaningless vocal approximation of a parrot. The man's voice dropped to nearly nothing when he said this part, trying to form words, starting with names, starting with the names of people who came onto the property. Ethan's flashlight caught the scratches on the cage wall, directly behind the man's left shoulder. The deepest one, pressed hardest into the wood, wasn't a tally mark, it was a name, Ethan. The darkness at the far end of the tunnel shifted, not movement exactly, more like the quality of the dark changing, the way pressure changes in a room when a door opens in another part of the building. His flashlight beam reached 30 feet and found nothing. Then from somewhere in the black beyond its reach, in a voice that was not quite right, too low, too shaped, carrying the texture of something enormous, learning to build words from the inside out. Ethan, he got the cage open in 11 seconds. The man's legs had the unreliable quality of limbs that had been folded in one position for too long, and Ethan took his weight across his shoulders without discussion and started moving. Back the way he'd come. Fast but controlled, flashlight forward, the tunnel pressing in from both sides with a claustrophobia that felt newly specific, like it had been designed to specification. He found two others on the way back, one conscious, one barely. He got them moving with the particular economy of someone who has collapsed the decision-making process down to a single variable, forward. He'd almost reached the stairs when Arthur's voice came through the walls. Not down the tunnel, through the walls, from speakers Ethan hadn't noticed, thin wire running parallel to the light wire, a PA system that had been waiting. The old man's voice was calm in the way that specific kind of madness is calm, the way people are calm when they've made a peace with their worldview that nobody else is invited to share. Then the alarm started, and the lights went out completely. Not a flicker, not a gradual failure. Instantaneous total darkness, the kind that pushes against the eyes with physical weight. Someone ahead of Ethan screamed. He kept his flashlight moving, kept talking, kept the group oriented to his voice. Then he heard the other sound. Solomon moving in the tunnels was nothing like the barn doorway. In the open, he'd been a presence. Down here, in the earthen corridors where the ceiling cleared him by less than a foot, he was something else entirely. Weight and breath and the specific silence of large-scale predation, the silence that prey animals have evolved to recognize at the cellular level. Not rushing, not accelerating, pacing. The patient, metronomic footfall of something that understood geometry. The woman who'd been barely conscious was the one who fell. Ethan heard it behind him, a stumble, a cry, and then the change in air pressure that meant Solomon had stopped pacing. He turned. His flashlight found the scene in pieces, the way flashlights do, the way that makes things worse rather than better. He turned away after the first second. He kept moving. He had learned, in the last 5 minutes, the specific arithmetic of survival. The calculation that happens below the level of morality, in the part of the nervous system that precedes conscience. Arthur's voice came through the speakers again, still conversational, still carrying that unsettling pastoral warmth. Fear changes the taste, and then, as if clarifying a point of philosophy, he has always preferred the ones who ran. Ethan's flashlight found the staircase. 12 feet. 10. The group compressed toward it with the single-minded hydraulic pressure of people who have reduced existence to one immediate coordinate. He understood it now, the full shape of it, in a way that the newspaper archives and the bartender's warnings and even the tunnel writings hadn't quite assembled into clarity. Arthur didn't keep Solomon. Arthur didn't own Solomon. Arthur served Solomon with the particular devotion of someone who had watched the object of their worship demonstrate its nature across 30 years of evidence and found their faith repeatedly confirmed. The property wasn't a compound, it was a temple, and the tunnels were its liturgy. 8 feet from the stairs, Ethan's flashlight died. He kept moving on momentum, one hand on the earthen wall, counting steps, listening to the breathing of the survivors around him and the other breathing. The deeper one, the one that didn't belong to anything that should have been able to follow them this far this fast. Then it stopped, not retreating, not turning back, simply ceasing, the way sound ceases when its source is no longer moving, directly behind him, close enough that when Ethan stopped walking, the air displacement still reached him. He didn't turn around. He stood in the complete dark and listened to it breathe for 3 seconds that lasted the length of something much longer. Then, patient and low and constructed from the inside out, each syllable assembled with the deliberate effort of something learning a new instrument. Hungry. The feeding chamber smelled like the end of the world. Ethan pressed his back against the rusted iron door, chest heaving, the flashlight trembling in his grip as he swept it across the room. Chains dangled from ceiling hooks. The floor was dark with things he refused to name. And at the center of it all stood Arthur Voss, completely still, hands at his sides, watching Ethan with the hollow patience of a man who had already made his decision. "We have to go," Ethan hissed. "Now, the other one, Marcus, he's still breathing. We can still get him out." Arthur didn't move. Arthur. Ethan grabbed his arm. The old man's skin felt like cold wax. "I found the tunnel on the east side. There's a grate. I already kicked it loose. If we move right now, you don't understand what you're asking." Arthur finally looked at him. Not with fear, with something worse. Resignation. "He'll track us. Both of us. He tracked the last 3 who ran. Found them within 48 hours. He paused. Found what was left of them. From somewhere deep in the tunnels came that sound, the low, rhythmic clicking getting closer. Ethan grabbed Marcus by the shoulder, the half-conscious prisoner stirring against the wall. "Then we run fast. Arthur, I'm not leaving you here." "Yes." Arthur placed a hand on Ethan's chest and pushed, gently but with absolute finality. "You are." The clicking grew louder. The torchlight at the far end of the tunnel began to flicker and die, darkness swallowing the corridor in sections, like something enormous was moving through it, blocking every source of light as it came. "Arthur, I've been feeding him for 11 years. The old man's voice was barely above a whisper, but it didn't shake. "I brought those people here. I told myself it was survival. I told myself I had no choice." His jaw tightened. "I'm making a choice now." Ethan heard it before he saw it. The wet, heavy breathing. The smell hit him like a physical blow. Rot and iron and something animal underneath. Something ancient. Solomon stepped out of the dark. He was enormous. That was the first thing. 7 feet, maybe more, body wrong in ways the mind tried to rewrite in real time. Limbs too long, neck too thick, head slightly too large for the torso beneath it. His face was almost human. Almost. His eyes caught the light and held it, burning amber in the black. Arthur turned to face him. "He'll never stop feeding," Arthur said, not to Solomon. To Ethan. A warning, a confession, a eulogy all at once. No matter where you go, no matter what you do. Ethan ran. He didn't look back. He told himself he didn't look back, but he heard it. A single, sharp sound, then silence. Then the wet continuation of something he would spend the rest of his life trying to unhear. He dragged Marcus through the grate, up the earthen tunnel, lungs screaming. Behind him, the fire he'd set in the generator room had found the fuel lines. The explosion hit like a fist through the ground. The tunnels groaned. Timbers cracked and split. He could feel the heat on his heels as he hauled Marcus up through the cellar hatch, across the barn floor, and out into the freezing night air, just as the roof gave way in a cascade of burning wood and collapsing darkness. Ethan fell onto the grass and didn't get up for a long time. The barn burned, the ground swallowed the tunnels, the smoke rose black against a moonless sky. When Ethan finally lifted his head, chest still heaving, he looked toward the tree line. 2 amber eyes stared back at him from the dark, unblinking, patient. Then slowly, they were gone. The video went live on a Tuesday. 43 minutes of raw footage, shaky cam, and fractured audio, half of it barely watchable. Ethan uploaded it without music, without cuts, without the horror channel branding he'd spent 2 years building. Just a plain black thumbnail and a title in white text. This is what happened at the Voss property. This is real. In 72 hours, it had 4 million views. The comments called it a masterpiece. A slow burn ARG. The best found footage concept since Marble Hornets. Someone made a fan edit with a horror soundtrack. Someone else built a Reddit thread dedicated to identifying the costume design. A film student in Portland wrote a 2,000-word breakdown of Ethan's brilliant use of negative space and practical effects. Marcus gave one interview, a single 2-paragraph statement to a local paper that nobody picked up nationally, and then disappeared somewhere quiet. Ethan never blamed him. Ethan stopped sleeping in full darkness sometime around week 3. Not because of nightmares exactly, the nightmares he could manage. It was the sounds that undid him. The breathing he heard outside his 3rd-floor apartment window. The way his dog, a beagle named Rue, who had never once growled at anything in her 5 years of life, now sat motionless at the foot of the bed each night, staring at the window, hackles raised, refusing to make a sound. The reports started filtering in around week 5. A farmer 2 counties east found 11 sheep mutilated in a locked pen. No tracks, no forced entry. A jogger outside a township called Ridley Creek saw something cross the road ahead of her. She described it to the local paper as a man, but not walking right. Police found deer remains nearby, stripped to the bone. Nobody connected the dots. Ethan did. He started sleeping with the lights on, then with a knife on the nightstand, then barely sleeping at all, just lying still in the blue light of his phone, watching the window, listening to Rue stare at whatever waited on the other side of the glass. On the 41st night, at 3:14 a.m., his phone lit up. A notification. New follower on his channel. The account had no username, just a string of random characters. No profile picture. Created 6 minutes ago. One direct message, no text, just an attachment. He opened it. The photo was taken from outside. Looking in. His bedroom window, the curtain slightly parted, the glow of his charging phone just barely illuminating the shape in the bed. Him, lying there, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in sleep he didn't remember falling into. The image was time-stamped 43 minutes ago. Ethan sat completely still. The phone shook in his hand. Rue made no sound. Outside, somewhere just beyond the glass, something breathed slowly in the dark. He scrolled down. You just watched the beginning. Solomon is still out there. Ethan burned the barn. He collapsed the tunnels. He escaped with his life, barely. And it didn't matter. Because the thing living inside that lion isn't bound by property lines. It isn't stopped by fire. It doesn't forget a face, a voice, or a scent. Sections 1 through 8 were the origin, the discovery, the first time Ethan looked directly into something ancient and wrong. And it looked back. But here's what's coming. What happens when Solomon leaves the woods? What happens when he reaches the city? And what happens when Ethan realizes he was never the hunter in this story? The Solomon story isn't over. The next chapter drops soon. And if you thought the barn was the worst place this could go, you haven't seen where Solomon feeds next. If this story kept you up last night, you already know what to do. Like this video, it feeds the algorithm. Better the algorithm than Solomon. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next chapter. Trust us, you don't want to fall behind on this one. Follow us across all platforms for updates, behind the scenes, and early drops. And as always, thank you for watching. You made it to the end. Not everyone does. See you in the next one. If Solomon doesn't find you first.